to make a observation about the minutes after that. The first one on April 7th. The other two, I don't have any corrections. On April 7th, I have 3 corrections. On page 3, paragraph 2, it reads, Commissioner Stevens spoke about the consequences the city would face if it did not fund the $50 million. I thought consequences was too harsh of a word. Went back and looked, and at the 54-minute mark, heard my actual words. And what I'd like to do is I would like to strike the words consequences the city would face if it did not fund, and I would like to insert the words budget dynamics of changing the plan pay down of. It would then read, Commissioner Stevens spoke about the budget dynamics of changing the plan pay down of $50 million in police pension fund unfunded liability. The second item is on page 3, paragraph 3. It speaks to the structural budget impact depending upon if there were alternative uses to the $50 million. And I wanted to add the words that were omitted from there. There was a part that was omitted. It infers that it was just for 1 year. The structural budget comment that Sonia made was that it was over the 5-year planning horizon. I think that's an important addition to have there. So I would request that after the word fund, the words over the 5-year planning horizon be inserted. And then shortly after that, the word from, there's a stray to that shouldn't be there. It would then read, Ms. Andrews said the commission and the council could suggest alternatives for the $50 million, though the structurally balanced nature of the general fund over the 5-year planning horizon is dependent on the cost savings from the pension liability pay down. And that was at the 59-54 mark of the recording, if anyone needs to check it. And then the final thing was there was a discussion on page 3, paragraph 7, line 9 about these $128 million operating budget, potential concerns, et cetera. Bottom line is I was quoted in there as saying there was a part I wasn't concerned about. It didn't explain why. And again, I listened to the 1 hour, 20-minute mark, and I would just like to insert the following words. After the number 123.8 million, it would be due to atypical expenditures using previously accumulated fund balance and expenses partially offset by new related revenues. It would then read, Commissioner Stevens explained that while he was concerned about expenses, he considered the operating budget increase to be closer to 40 or 45 million, not 123.8 million, due to atypical expenditures using previously accumulated fund balance and expenses partially offset by new revenues. And that was at the 1 hour and 20-minute mark.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Are there any other corrections or additions to the minutes? Otherwise, the board chair would accept a motion for approval as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. If everybody just votes. Okay. The motion is approved unanimously. Commissioner Stevens, I believe you had another comment you wanted to make.
Yes, I did have one more. And in going through the minutes, this is a lot of work. And I know, I can tell from Commissioner Carla's comments, she always does a pretty thorough review. And it's painful. And so what I realized is a lot of these things are out there for people to look at the entire video, and whoever transcribes it, they had to take a 4-hour meeting and decide what was important to include in 10 pages of minutes, and that's pretty subjective. My observation is that the video's out there for anyone who wants to listen to it. I asked city staff if it might be possible to have our minutes condensed so that the minutes would just have the topic area that was discussed and then have any subsequent vote. That way the minutes would record area discussed, a subsequent vote, and wouldn't necessarily require someone to go through hours of tape to subjectively decide what extra information could be in there. Because I found even for the things I said, some of it, yeah, I'm glad you put that in there. Other stuff I then had to make corrections for. So it's really for this group to, particularly those of you who've been reading through the minutes, do you think that is a takeaway, or do you want to keep it the way it is? So that was my observation.
Commissioner Newman.
Commissioner Stevens, I think I think that makes sense. What I would ask as a part of that is just put the timestamp as to where it occurred in the video, so we're not searching through. But I mean, you could sit there and you can say, okay, we decided this, but here's what was said at that moment, and then you can comment on that, but there's really not a dispute as to what's on the video, so I agree with that.
If I can just respond to that, I forgot to say that because in my mind, if you just had topic, decision, and the mark of where it was, then anyone could decide if they wanted to go hear what the discussion was.
Commissioner Carla.
Yes, I will respectfully disagree because having an actual printed copy is very, very helpful. I mean, I have referred back to minutes from 20 years ago, and even in a lawsuit on the preserve, had to refer back to ones 5 years before. And it was extremely helpful to have them. And some people don't have the ability to go through all of these, tapes, et cetera, and use the, as a person who can't use a computer because of vision disability. Some of these things are hard to do, but from a historical standpoint, I think having a paper record is important, and that's my opinion. So thank you.
Commissioner Stevens.
That was my dilemma when I decided to propose this, and then what went through my mind was, okay, so now I have to thoroughly compare my notes from a meeting to minutes to decide whether every salient fact that I think should be documented is included in there, and then do I really want to take that on as an additional responsibility? I'd rather spend my time elsewhere. So I absolutely understand what you're saying, but we're really relying on a third party who had to discern what's important and what isn't important when it comes to putting the key elements of discussions in, and that's a pretty big ask. So if there's any other comments, I still may make a motion on this, but if there's any other comments to Commissioner Carla's points that would help, I'd love to hear that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. And then
I guess I have a question for staff, legal. I mean, isn't it required that we have minutes? I mean, isn't this going to require a city policy change? Because I believe you're required to have, so I'm asking a question of the staff table, please.
and Commissioner Carla, that was kind of what I was going to talk about.
Okay.
I was going to ask the city manager what other committees do and what the council does in terms of detailed minutes versus more abbreviated minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, for the record, Greg Caton, the city manager. Sorry for my couple minutes tardiness. I was wrapping up another meeting. Thank you for the question. I might suggest that staff look into this and come back with a recommendation to move on today's discussion. I have had considerable discussions with the city clerk in regards to that. I often refer to city council as the parent organization, if you will, and then the boards and commissions really following underneath that. There's primarily three types of minutes. There's detailed minutes, actually verbatim. So there's verbatim minutes, there's summary minutes, and then action minutes, progressively in that order. And quite frankly, we have a little bit of variation across the city. I will tell you that for the ones that are completed in-house by our staff are more towards the latter, which is summary or action. Summaries really kind of capture it. We outsource this because this was added on. So we're outsourcing. We're, as a budget review commission, this word and this discussion is literally costing us money as we're outsourced, just a little bit of a pun there, as we outsource subscribing. So they do verbatim, I would refer to, or closely verbatim-like. I will tell you, over my 3 decades of being in this business, it's changed because of video over the years, to your earlier discussion. So again, in just conclusion, I might suggest that you give us a little time to come back with a recommendation for council, or excuse me, for the commission's consideration.
Commissioner Stevens.
Okay, we'll bring it to an end now. I like that. My desire would be that it be the most condensed version, and then maybe we all keep track of salient things we think are important than we do as an addition to the minutes when we review the minutes. And then the other thing I struggled with when I went through, it looks like your convention is to say the title and the name of a person, then after that just have their name. But in one of the minutes, it's like, well, do I try to correct this stuff? Because one of them said city manager, town manager, Mr. Canton, and city manager Greg Canton. So there's 4 different ways in which you're described in there, and it's like, do I even go through and try to clean this stuff up or what? And that kind of led to my wanting to condense it. But I'll look forward to you getting back to us. Thank you.
Yeah, I think if there's no objection, the committee would welcome input from the city on how we should do this, so we can put that for a future agenda item. Is that agreeable with everyone? Yeah. I don't think we need a motion for that. Okay. Let's move on to staff update.
While we're waiting for the presentation to pull up, welcome back from your summer vacation. Hopefully all of you had a great summer. Okay, so I just have a few slides to give you some updates, and also for the sake of the audience, maybe here or at home, who haven't been with us last year and wondering what we're all about. So next slide. So just a quick recap of what the Budget Review Commission did last year. So we started in February after the Budget Review Commission was formed in January, and we had a series of educational meetings where we went over revenues, financial policies, pension costs, and reserves and contingencies. We then went into March, where we looked at the proposed capital budget. We also specifically looked at capital project increases that were larger than $1 million or 10%. And then in April, we looked at the proposed operating budget. We went through various department presentations explaining the proposed operating budget to you. And then on April 22nd, the Budget Review Commission held a work study with council to provide some updates of the work of the commission and also some topics for consideration. And then following that, the City Council received presentation of the proposed budget at the beginning of May, and then May 20th, they adopted the tentative budget, and on June 10th, they adopted the final budget. Now, just kind of a point of what you need to know here as a Budget Review Commission is that by our city charter, the council is required to adopt the tentative budget no later than the second regular meeting in May, and also adopt the final budget no later than the first meeting in June. So next slide. So the Budget Review Commission focused on some of the areas that the city had already started working on. And since these were some of the areas the Budget Review Commission discussed, we wanted to let you know some of these updates and initiatives that the city has embarked on. And I'm going to let Greg speak to the first few points. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you for the opportunity. We spent a lot of time, or a fair amount of time, associated with the capital projects in the spring, and wanted to report back of some progress and some implementation of suggestions from the commission. Specifically, there was the suggestion of a tiger team. I believe Commissioner Stevens coined it that way, and we've implemented that tiger team as it relates to capital. We utilize that in 2 forms. First of all, even though the budget had already been identified for 25-26, we are utilizing it for capital projects for 25-26, specifically in the way we call it readiness. And is this project ready? And is the funding associated? How do we allocate staff to perform and prepare for that capital project? As an example, it might not come as a surprise to you that the beginning of the fiscal year, call it July 1st, all of those capital projects and all of those departments are ready to hit the ground running. They certainly don't want to wait till June. Well, we can't, we don't have the resources to start all of those in July, of course. There was not a process or a method to really spread that work out. And now with the Tiger team, the capital review team, we have that. So we call it a budget a readiness form for those capital projects in the already budgeted in that current year. And then we actually have started the budget development for 26-27 early. And we are utilizing that team. We call it a pre-BUDS. I'll use that technical term. And our system, we call it the BUDS system when you enter a capital project. And so we wanted to have an opportunity of a vetting opportunity pre-BUD, before it actually gets entered into the system. Is this a project that we believe is worthy for even consideration? And it's a higher level capture of a concept of a capital project. And then what we have done, and that's been implemented, we started all of this in essentially May with the existing readiness, if you will, the first step. And then as we've looked to develop the 26-27, implemented the second phase where departments have submitted their pre-BUDS form. And in many instances, what we see is a capital construction request for a sizable amount. And we've sent that back and say, where's your design? Where's your scope? Where's your feasibility? And that has really been the benefit of that process, is to spread that out. And historically, and we've had so much discussions in the spring, this group will appreciate this, of it really being compressed or lumped into one, and then really not identifying the initial capital construction cost until you were almost mid-project, if you will. And I'll give the example that this group, I believe, will appreciate, is the Cactus Pool. And the Cactus Pool, I remember the commission and commissioner asking, it's $31 million, which was the 2019 bond amount. Is $31 million going to get this going, going to complete it? And it was in the 5-year, and the answer was unequivocally no, that we don't believe that's enough money. And so what we have done is put in a scope work, feasibility work to the tune, feels like 250,000 is the magic number for many of these, and then not even put in a 31 million because it's the wrong number, quite frankly. It's a hypothetical number that was somewhat developed in potentially 2016, 2017, which is so outdated, and that's where some of the misinformation in the community, I think, has come from. We developed a 2016 dollar amount that went into the 2019 bond issue, and then we're going to construct in 2029 and think that that's accurate, and it couldn't be farther from the truth. So identify feasibility up front, and then any potential gap, identify that, and I'll just use a hypothetical number, and let's just say that comes back at 50 million. Then when we initiate that and bring that project forward, we will say 31 million from this funding source and 19 million from this other funding source. I don't believe that discussion was previously occurring, so sorry for the detail on that, but I think the group will appreciate our implementation of the path that you set us on there. And then I would also talk about the pavement study that's been initiated. We have some initial estimates of that 10-year program. It didn't have all the costs included in there, and so we've asked our consultants to go back. They're wrapping up that work, and that will be completed in time as we get earnestly into the budget development for 26-27. I anticipate that pavement program will take 10 years to get up to a pavement condition index that is appropriate for the community. As the commission will remember, we had a creative financing, and I use that affectionately in this case, of finding some additional funding for pavement in 25-26, and we reallocated some dollars that were previously associated with Thomas Road improvement and put that into pavement throughout the entire system. And as a result, our historical funding of approximately $10 to $15 million for pavement preservation increased up to approximately $42 million for the current fiscal year. And that's why you see a tremendous amount of pavement work being done throughout the community. And specifically in Old Town, we wanted to invest there. We do have $40 million that's being invested in Old Town, but we wanted to touch every single road within Old Town, and we are on the path to do that within the next 30 days, wrapping up before event season kicks off. So I'm really proud about that work that's being done. and just maybe for the broader audience, our scope in doing that is if you can do have the discipline to do regular preventative maintenance, then that really prevents you from doing that significant road reconstruction that is so costly. So we're on that path, again, approximately $42 million for the current fiscal year. Oh, I buried the lead. Here's the most important point. When we reallocated those dollars from Thomas, we therefore applied for a grant and received a grant for Thomas Road. So essentially replaced those dollars when we could not have received a grant for maintenance. You don't get grants for maintenance. But we received a grant for the Thomas Road work and therefore utilized that scarce or restricted dollars in that sense for broader pavement management across the community. And then I'll just quickly go through the unfilled positions. I, for the last 6 months, have been reviewing every single position that comes vacant. The departments have to send in the request for approval, and I have to authorize that before we initiate a recruitment process. So every single vacancy within this organization comes by my desk for approval before we move on. And the contractual services is an area that is going to take a while to really get where we need to go, but it's been my estimation that so much of our work that is performed has been outsourced for contractual services. And I think this is because of downward pressure for many, many years on our position count. In many instances, the work still has to be done, so then we've gone to this contractual. Well, many years ago, that probably was a very efficient, cost-effective way to do things. What has happened, because that private contractor has to meet payroll in a very tight labor market. The labor market is softening in some areas, but I would submit around 21 through 23, we saw an extremely tight labor market, and therefore we saw significant increases on the contractual side. So now we're revisiting those contractual relationships to see, does it make sense to continue to outsource the performance of this work? Is there an opportunity to do that in-house? Continuing to do that, and then also as those contracts come up, doing an RFP, making sure that we're getting the most competitive pricing for that service when we do need to outsource it. And I would wrap it up with that.
Thank you, Greg. And just the last bullet point, we have started putting together a financial condition sustainability report that will provide historical trend information and some key financial metrics. And so we are waiting for our fiscal year 25 audit to be complete, and so we can include those numbers and we can share that report with the commission. So next slide.
Oh.
So next slide. So I wanted to provide an update to the commission that I will be bringing an ordinance to the council on October 7th to amend the code related to the Budget Review Commission. You have received a copy of the ordinance in your packet, and basically these recommendations to amend the ordinance came from feedback I received from council members, Budget Review Commission members, and also city leadership. And they are meant to help simplify and make the work of the commission hopefully easier. And so really what the idea or the concept is that the Budget Review Commission's work should be primarily focused on reviewing the budget and less so on reviewing operations or, to the extent that you have looked at operations and provided some valuable input. We very much appreciate it, but the focus of the Budget Review Commission should be more on the proposed budget document that we submit to you. So with that, that feedback that was received, we have an ordinance going to council to propose clarifying the duties for reviewing the proposed budget, and any kind of in-depth examination and review of focus areas should be also related to the budget and would be presented as part of a work plan for council consideration consideration and approval. And also, there were also recommendations from last year that maybe didn't have a chance to get discussed fully by the commission. So we're recommending that the ordinance specify that we will do the recommendation process differently this year than last. And so it would allow the whole commission to fully vet through all the recommendations before it becomes a recommendation. And then finally, the current ordinance requires the commission to submit recommendations in a written report, and that was very challenging given the compressed timeline for the commission. So the recommendation is to allow the commission to present recommendations in a PowerPoint to the council and not, have to have a written report as such. So either or. So if the commission wanted to do a written report to present to council, that's an option. But if it's too, tight of a timeline, it could be presented as bullet points in a presentation to council as well. So that will help the commission out. And then next slide, this is my last slide. So as we look to the work of the Budget Review Commission this year, I wanted to share with you the budget timeline. We do not plan to do the educational series of meetings that we did last year. So if any of you would need some education or refresher on the city's revenues, expenditures, or budget, we can provide that on a one-on-one basis. And last year's educational meetings are also recorded and available online. So we will not be conducting or holding any meetings in February or even in March to educate in terms of educating. However, that said, our budget process, if you can follow this chart, starts in November, where the departments submit and review budget requests and also the budget work that the budget department office has to do. And then between December and February, the budget office works with all the departments to go through line items and balancing the budget. And in March, the executive leadership team with the city manager reviews the budget and makes the final budget decisions. So there is multiple levels of review before it even is presented to the Budget Review Commission. And we release the budget typically the first week of April. And that is when the Budget Review Commission will be provided with the budget document. We were thinking we would hold some meetings, a couple meetings in March to go over the capital budget like we did last year, because the capital budget is usually done first. So we will probably do that again this year in March. And then in April, we'll probably hold a couple meetings to go over the operating budget. And I will be reaching out to each of you to find out what is a good time so that we can establish a commission meeting calendar for the year. And then, as we spoke about earlier, council is required to adopt the tentative budget, no later than the second meeting in May, and then adopt the final budget no later than the first meeting in June. And so the last slide I have is, so here's a possible schedule and timeline. So we have penciled in a work study session with council October 21st to provide council with a work plan and have them provide any direction and input. And between November and January, there could be a possible 1 or 2 meetings regarding any focus area work or any reports to the commission. And then really between March and April, those were the 2 months that we talked about reviewing the proposed capital budget and the operating budget, with possibly a work study April 21st with the City Council. So that is a proposed work plan or timeline, I would say, for the Budget Review Commission. And I can take any questions.
Thank you. We do have a couple of questions from commissioners, but before we do that, Greg, I believe we have a new city attorney, and so it seems to be a lot of our things get directed back towards the city attorney, so if you'd like to introduce her to the committee.
Hi, good morning. My name's Jen.
Oh, it went the other way.
Oh,
It was on before.
sorry.
Good thing I wasn't saying anything. Good morning. My name's Jennifer Fernandez. I'm new with the city, and I'll be helping you guys, and I'm here to help provide advice during your meetings.
Welcome. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions for you during the year.
Thanks.
Commissioner Newman.
So, City Manager Caton and oh, there we go. How's that? Better. Okay. Great job in getting all over the capital plan and the roads. I mean, those were probably two of the biggest gaps that we could identify in a short period of time last year. And so it was kind of the hurry up offense, and you work on the big rocks first. And along those lines, I mean, you're really tackling the process here in terms of doing that. And so I would encourage continuing with that feasibility work, all that. I can imagine it's now on a improvement cycle where it gets better and better. I mean, if nobody's talking to each other, then obviously there's going to be gaps. And then once people start talking, they say, well, gosh, we could do this, and I'm not going to start on January 1st. I could start in February 1st or whatever. But then your contractors are also, they're probably, when there's ambiguity in the scope of a project and the definition of a project, they just raise the prices. And we've talked about that, like how do we get our hands around that? And if there's ambiguity, that's your number one reason that contractors they just add money when there's risk and doubt, you know. So if we don't even have a design and we're asking for $50 million, or that's an extreme example, obviously there's going to be opportunity in the middle of that. So I appreciate getting on that, and if we can continue to advance that and even get more rigorous on the pre-work, because it's expensive to change later, but it's really cheap to spend time in the design, and it doesn't cost hardly anything to change a design, a budget, a staffing, whatever, but make sure everybody's in alignment and everybody's holding hands that we're going to go there. So that was terrific. From a road standpoint, obviously, you know, I'm amazed at how quickly you've gotten on that. So I'm very appreciative of that. As we get into the capital budget next time around, I would hope that we get into the prioritization, because more into the prioritization of what we're going to work on and telling council what we're not going to work on, because in the analysis I did, we had roughly $1 billion of capital projects, but about $700 million of it was rolling from year to year. Maybe it wasn't the same project, but it was the same bump in the rug. And so it just says that we didn't have enough resources, and we need to spread that out and say, we're not going to get to that in 2025 or even 2026. It's off the horizon for now, because we just can't get to it. So I think those are all areas of focus that are terrific on that. And then from a budget standpoint, I forgot my last point, so I'll think of it later, and I'll let Carla go from there. So,
Commissioner Carla.
Thank you. I echo what Commissioner Newman said about getting on the Capitol and the roads. That's excellent. I have a question about the ordinance, though. All other commissions in the city rotate chairs on a yearly basis. And how would we ask a question or propose to have that added to this ordinance, so that this commission is more in line with other commissions in the city? Thank you.
Commissioner Carla, thank you for the suggestions. We can bring that up with council.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Stevens.
The city treasurer, you said you'll bring it up with council, but does that mean you might modify this or you might not modify this to include her recommendation? Because her recommendation is intriguing to me, because right now the ordinance says the mayor appoints the chair. There could be a good reason for that. Otherwise, commission should appoint their chair, or they should be rotated possibly. So how are you going to decide what you want to put in the recommendation to council, or do you need to separately confer to the council members first before you do that?
Commissioner Stevens, that would be the council's decision if they want to do that. We would not be bringing it to council. So the council, when they review the ordinance, if they choose to change that, they can adopt an amended ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Then I guess what I'd encourage the people on the commission here would be to talk to whoever appointed you and if you believe that would be a valuable element to the way we operate, then you would encourage that person to include that in the ordinance. Then the other thing I wanted to mention is, for City Manager, thank you for what you provided back to us. I mean, that was somewhat gratifying. And, I mean, we're well compensated for what we do, but by you being able to add that, that made it feel a little bit better. So thank you for that. And then as far as the rest of the ordinance that's here, I kind of went through that. I don't think it really takes away anything from us. The message I kind of got in here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is more, hey guys, you're supposed to look at a budget. Why don't you look at the budget? Look at the pieces that you think are material coming into it, and if you happen to notice processes coming out of that that you can make recommendations for, fine, but otherwise it might be more helpful if you let council make the decisions on strategic things, and why don't you all look at the pieces of the budget? That's kind of how I'm reading where the subtle direction to this is going, and I think I'm okay with that. Because the way it's written right now, it says we can do a written report or we can do a public presentation, so it gives us flexibility. And in our next topic, we're going to be talking about what we want to do, and I think that's kind of up in the air right now as far as how we want to attack this animal. So thank you, unless there's something else you wanted to add to my comments.
Anyone else have any comments they want to make? Other than that, thank you. I think it was a very good presentation. Let's go on to item number 4, which is discuss the mission and work of the commission. Now, we have some ideas we want to talk to people about, but I want to make very clear that, you know, as interim vice chair, you know, there may be a new chair at the next meeting who may have a different approach to this. So I think what we're talking about today, we all understand may not be binding, but I think for the people that are sitting up here now, it's kind of the idea of the way we'd like to do it. And you know, we've all had a lot of input. We've all thought a lot about this. Commissioner Stevens did a lot of work over summer vacation on coming up with some ideas. I put a few of my thoughts down, and I think they go very well with each other, because I tend to look at things more from the 40,000-foot level strategic one, and then Mark looks at things as more of an actionable, tactical way to go. So I would just kind of like to kick it off with my thoughts and then turn it over to Commissioner Stevens and everybody else to get their ideas. So since I've been in Scottsdale, this is the second budget review committee that I'm aware of, and I was not involved with the first one, but I kind of listened to it and paid attention, and obviously more involved with this one. And it seemed to me that the reason for the Budget Review Commission is resident input on different ideas. And it seems to me that really the impetus to have a Budget Review Committee is that residents are always upset over CIP projects that run over budget and behind time. You know, that's one of the things that you read about in the paper a lot. You hear comments at council meetings all the time. The other idea that gets a lot of attention from people is the idea of whether or not the city staff is overstaffed and overpaid. You know, whether these are true or not, these are the things that people talk about. And the third one that we hear a lot about is Westworld, and the function of Westworld, the perceived problems and subsidies to Westworld, if these are real or not. But these are the things that I think people were really pushing to get a Budget Review Committee going. So I think from a 40,000-foot level, one of the best things we can do is to study those items and answer the questions that our residents have about those big issues. You know, the pavement is one thing that kind of goes under the CIP, but that's one of the things that we probably hear more about than anything else, the condition of the roads. So those are the things that a committee like this can really look into. And so that's my idea of really the reason behind the Budget Review Committee. And I would like to turn it over to Commissioner Stevens, because he put a lot of thought into this and has some very good ideas.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try to go, what I did on the slides, I'm going to go through the slides, and I'd like you to interject whenever you have any other thoughts for my fellow commissioners, because this was meant to be spurring a discussion. But what this document's all about is, this just says what we're supposed to do. We know that. Go to the next slide, please. This slide deck talks about a slide on lessons learned, suggested future considerations which we should discuss, and then a sample approach plan, which may or may not be how we want to tackle it. And then I had a fourth slide on sustainability assessment, because there's a lot of discussion on structural budget sustainability at the end. So one thought was, do we need to have that as an element? So we can go to the next slide now. Here's, on this one, again, these are a little more heavily my thoughts, so I hope no one's offended by this, but I found the open meeting law application to be quite stifling. And I also saw that we got more things done when one or two people could go off and meet with staff, dig into some meat, get into something, and report back to the commission. So I think one thing we need to discuss is what's the best way to get things done. I mean, Commissioner Newman and Commissioner Carla, when they went offline and met with things on the preserve, a lot of really good, valuable information came back that I don't know how you could have possibly done that if we all did it from the dais with different people coming up and making presentation to us. Yeah, and so one of the lessons learned was I thought we got more effective information when we broke it off into teams. There will be some discussions with legal about how we do that. There is some question about whether or not that's a subcommittee or whether it's just a couple of people going and tackling an area and whether we need any approval, so we might need some legal opinion on that. And then my final comment on the report generation was it was kind of a little bit messy the way it came together, but that was all us trying to learn how things happen. So a big part for us this year are going to be, how do you want to do this? Do you want to do a report like we did last year and have a couple of people gather the comments with staff and put it together, or do we want to go to a higher level and just do things to city council that way, or do we just want to report things as we find it throughout the year? And then the other thing I've talked to a lot of people about too is I'd like this to be as non-invasive to the city staff as possible. So one of the thought that we ought to be thinking about is for the areas we decide we want to look at, how does the information come together? And then would it be better if we entered at some point while the information's fresh on their mind so that we're not reinventing wheels? The other observation I had was I found that we got a lot of presentations made to us, but when we just get a presentation made to us, it's hard to get into the substance of something. So one thought for us is going to be, do we need to look at fewer areas, but a few people dig in deeper, or how do we want to do it? So I don't have answers to this, but I'll show you what we've got at the end. Did you want to interject something now?
Do you want us to ask as you go along, or do you want us to wait till the
Let's do
end?
this. Let me do the lessons learned slide and the next slide, and then
whatever works.
Then let's do some discussions.
works.
Okay, let me do the next slide, because that was my lessons learned. So my future consideration part here was the thought was we should coordinate more with city staff when we're doing some of these things. And then the other thought was, do we need a more detailed review plan by specific areas? And then we would have the different commissioners say, hey, we decide what areas we want to get into, and then, oh, I want to do that one, I want to do that one, I want to do that one, and then just to cover it all, is that kind of a tactical way you want to do it? And you're going to see an 8 or 9 page plan here that's the start of that, or is that just way too detailed and we're making too big of a deal out of this and we want to get up to a higher level? So I don't have that answered. I did a detailed plan you'll see at the end. It was more, it's better than than starting with a white piece of paper. Just start knocking things out or changing it if you do want to go down that path. But one of the things this ordinance has is we're supposed to have a work study session with city council where we're going to submit our plan. So the best thing we can come out of today is what's that plan going to look like? So maybe that's one of the things we ought to be marching towards. How detailed, or is it a higher level and we'll fill in the blanks later, or what is that plan going to look like? And then my recommendation here was if we could do 2 or 3 member teams to jump into some areas, that might be a more effective way to get good information and then report back. We kind of did that. I mean, Vice Chair Schweiker and I, we did that with the capital projects, and then we reported back to the group. I thought that worked somewhat well. You did that with the preserve. I thought that worked somewhat well. So is that a better model? And then we'll talk about how to do the report generation. So let me see what the next slide is, but I think I want to stop now and the next part now gets into what an approach plan might look like. Let me stop now and let you all have some discussion.
Commissioner Carla?
Yes. First, I want to thank Commissioners Swikert and Stevens for all the work they did. I mean, it's very, very helpful. I didn't turn in anything because mine all fits in one sentence. I think that we need to be more efficient and more focused and set a better example. Because one of the things I remember most about last cycle is looking out in the room and seeing top staff from every department sitting there for hours on end, and all I could think was, how much is this meeting costing the taxpayers? And we're supposed to be watching the budget. So that was my feedback from last cycle. But again, I think all of this is very good. I agree with everything on Commissioner Schweikert's and pretty much everything on Commissioner Stevens, especially the sustainability assessment. I think that's really important. I think the subcommittees, absolutely, that's how you get work done. We just have to make sure we're doing it legally, because I think last cycle we were kind of treading on that line. Open meeting laws, we have to follow them, because they serve a purpose. But you're right, we can do it in a better way. And you have the understatement of the year, which is the report process was flawed. Because I know you've spent so much time, Commissioner Stevens. The one thing I do have a question about is when you brought up the idea of thinking that future agenda items is an issue, I think that's the only way, though, that staff can prepare. I mean, we need to say what we want to talk about so that they can be helpful to us, as they always are, by preparing information for us. So again, all the great things you say, and my main question was, I didn't understand the one on future agenda items, because I think you have to do it, unless there's another idea I'm not aware of. So thank you.
Let me just adjust. What I meant on that was, to me, it seemed like that kept us from getting things done because, like right now, can we talk about something? Can I talk about, hey, I got an idea for what we want to do for unfilled positions? Oh, I can't do that. Oh, okay, I need an agenda item for next meeting so we can talk about that. It felt like that was a constraint for me, so it might just be in the way we do things. But I would agree with the fact that if you have a well-thought-out agenda item and tell staff clearly what you want to have addressed, yeah, that's a great way to do that. So I'm still learning process.
Commissioner Newman.
I think this comes down to priority and thinking strategically, because, and I agree with, on the future part here, we need to have a plan, and there might be projects where there's 2 to 3, 2 people go off and do, and there might be 2 or 3 of those projects, but all of those take up staff bandwidth. So the limited resource here is staff bandwidth and resource. So we can go and do my favorite project or Carla's favorite project, or I'm sure Skyler will have some favorite projects, and we can all go do those. But I think we have to, and you were big on auditing. We have to prioritize as a group. What's that list of prioritized items, and do that as a group here, and then say, okay, we're going to draw the line here because that's as far as we can really go without overwhelming city staff. We can do length, width, and breadth and try to boil the ocean, or we can say, no, these are some really important ones. Last year, I mean, it was kind of a hurry-up offense, but we got it right. Capital plan, roads, and staff was able to get on that. And now, hopefully, with some of the efficiency improvements that Greg's putting together, we'll be able to get more bandwidth to work with there. But, I think we just can't shove more into the system. So I think in that future planning part, we need to make sure we're doing it, because we're asking them to prioritize. We're asking staff to prioritize. I think we ought to do the same here rather than just come up with a bunch of ideas to go work on. So I would just ask that we spend some time to do that before we go off and send, crusades of 2 or 3 people at a time to go raid city staff time. So,
Commissioner Stevens, I believe you still have some more slides.
Okay, yeah, let me, what I'll do now is what you're about to see next would be a framework for what a work plan might look like. So this will be high level as a possible way to approach it, and then there's an attachment after this. It's actually an 8 or 9 page work plan. We could gut or change, or a couple of you can take it offline and do something with it. So this is where I'm getting a little bit weaker as far as the next step. But let's go to the next slide. So I tried to follow what the ordinance told us we need to do. And so a proposed plan might say, okay, in the general fund, you know what? We ought to decide what departments we're going to review. There's a whole bunch of departments there, and if we want to rotate some of them every year, probably have to keep police and fire in there because those are two big ones. The degree to which we dig into each one or the area we go into in each one might vary from year to year. But the one thought would be, okay, those departments decide what you're going to look at, and then are we looking at FTEs in these areas? Are we looking for, what are the information requests we want to look at? So how do we want to carve it? And again, this is an auditor mentality for me being, an Ernst & Young audit partner. And this might be too detailed. But anyway, so general fund, and then we look at which ones you want to look at. You might rotate them from year to year. Enterprise fund, we didn't do anything last year. Probably need to look at water this year. Is there another one we need to look at? Maybe, or a special purpose fund. We can go to the next slide then, because then the details I have kind of get into this. And then for capital projects, one thought would be, okay, here's an approach you could have. We need to understand what the key projects. Do we pick the 5 largest ones? Do you pick some other ones? Do you look at the ones that had changes of the 10% and $1 million that we should look at? So somehow we should scope what we're going to look at. And then once you do that, then that's the final bullet point about, well, what are we going to do once we do that? Do we look at the 10 largest projects and do a detailed review and say, okay, show me how the cost estimate works so we can get a feel for what elements of it's already a firm fixed price contract, therefore we know the number's good, what area still has some variability, and how do we feel about the amount that's budgeted there to be looked at. And so, like, for example, on something like this, it might be helpful to know when they're putting their estimates together, and then if that's a contract area, project area we want to look at, do we then come in and say, hey, we need a couple-hour meeting with your key people on that and show us the elements of how you came up with your estimate, let us ask questions, and then we'll decide if we want you to look at anything else, and then we would report our findings back to the commission. So anyway, this is a way to approach it. And then the next slide, is this my sustainability one? Sustainability, this would just be a way to look at sustainability because there were some mixed feelings as to what the situation was. I was one that I thought the city actually did a very commendable job of having that front of mind. When I did something similar at San Diego, that was not the case. They did not recognize one-time items. I believe this staff does recognize the importance of having recurring revenues matched with recurring expenses and not using one-time revenues to offset recurring expenses. But this would be an approach if someone wants to jump into the sustainability part. I know right now the city treasurer is working on a sustainability report that has a lot of good information in there that appears to have a good balanced assessment. I think you're also going to have your own opinion on there for people to look at. So I think there's going to be something good there that may suffice for what this is, or it may be something that we need to look at. And then decide what we want to do in this area. So right now, I just threw out a whole bunch of straw men for us to try to figure out what we wanted to do. And is that it? Was there something after this? Okay, and now what's after this is like an 8 or 9 page document that's drilling down into the details. It's my auditor mentality work plan that would be, okay, here's how you're going to do it. Go follow this work plan. This was very detailed, and again, I just wanted it for the commissioners to see this is an approach, and I am not married to this at all, because when I did this, it was very painful, and I'm not sure I necessarily want to have to work that hard. But it's out there for you all, and now maybe it's best to have a discussion about what's the best way to attack it. But I think a good way to look at it is like the general fund, or the operating fund, enterprise fund, capital. And then how do you want to be attacking, and who wants to jump into things? And then my hope would be there's probably some of you that are passionate about certain elements that you want to get into. You ought to do that. And then maybe you need to do one other that we need somebody to do that maybe isn't your top priority, but do it for the good of the cause. So I'll take a break now.
Does anyone have any comments? Commissioner Carla.
First off, thank you again for all of this really good work, because this helps us just get our minds around it. The only thing I would, say do we really have to? Is on the prior one, you say in the parking lot, that we need to bring all of those items forward and figure out how we're going to look at them. There's some in the parking lot that probably can be discarded, and before we say, let's bring them all forward, we probably need to do a very quick evaluation. But other than that, I think this will, and I think this dovetails in real well with what Sonia's prepared as far as how to go through a work plan. So again, thank you.
Well, and I did try to get all the parking lot items in here on an objective basis, regardless of my personal feeling about them, so I do echo your comment. And then also as part of this, city staff, I guess once we're done talking up here, city staff probably would have some comments we'd like to hear.
Commissioner Newman.
Okay. Yeah, as we're getting I think we need to think about this a little bit. We're getting our head around, this is great work, and you and I we talked about it a little bit over the beginning of the summer. And there's a lot there there's a lot in terms of city operations and things like that. And of course, that's a work stream that you have to prioritize. Once again, I come back to prioritizing, but then I think about things like sustainability, and a big word that we don't always understand what it means, and it doesn't mean what Carla thinks it means in terms of when I talk about this. This is sustainability in terms of business, operations, financial, what are the forces that are affecting Scottsdale? And one of the things that is coming at us very hard, and it's not necessarily, it may be captured in this, but not necessarily. It's something that's really is when we look at AI, automation, all of these things. If Scottsdale is going to be a premier city and we attract tourism and we're looking for efficient ways to operate, I've thought a lot about this over the summer in terms of what could that trend mean for us, and we're in our traditional, hey, let's put our budget together and we're going to pay for our city services and we hire a certain number of people and we do that. But then what does that trend mean? And I think about it in terms of admin, like our example earlier of meeting minutes. There's AI out there that can analyze that and do a lot of that and automate those things. And City Manager Caton, if you have plans and operations on this, I'd love to hear from you on those things. But I think about financial, and Sonia's putting together, they're going through and getting our systems revamped and getting new systems. There are people out there and consultants that will go through your whole budget and quickly give you where you're high, where you're low, and opportunities where you're paying double for certain things. So those are leverages of more traditional uses of AI. But now you start getting into things like operations, and you talk about wanting to add staff for the preserves to monitor. Well, there's robotic capabilities to monitor things like that. You've all seen the robotic dogs and things like that. Those are all programmable. Carla was laughing about that when I was talking about earlier. But when I think about city services, things we want to do, there's things that we wouldn't necessarily want to fund, like we had a discussion of the senior center and services, but that requires headcount, that requires expense. What if somehow AI and robotics are able to support some of that and do that very cost effectively? That might make it more acceptable from a taxpayer standpoint. It seems to me this is such a trend that we have, and when we talk about security and city services, fire, police, all of these things, this doesn't mean jobs going away. This means transformation, and there hasn't been a technological shift like this in the last 3 industrial revolutions that has not meant more jobs, more productivity. It hasn't meant jobs go away. That means they change maybe. But if we're ahead of the curve and we're ahead of AI and we're moving forward with it, time's our friend, and we can make a transition so people don't have to worry about whether they're going to have jobs or anything like that. But I think we make a much more bright and shining city and a much more productive city and much more efficient use of the resources we have. And to me, that's a sustainability issue. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and I don't know if it fits here or not, but that would be an example of something along those lines. And now this might be my favorite pet project that I was talking about. I think that's where the council has to say, yeah, we ought to do that. And City Manager Caton, you may have ideas about that and thoughts. You may already have things going on around that, but it seems to me like that's a much bigger piece of work to think about, but it might have a big impact on what we do strategically with our budget and where we go going forward. And we'd have to get a lot of people get their head around it to what it means, because there's so many dimensions to it. And it's also coming at us so fast that when we thought about it, when we were thinking about it back in May, it's now even different now here in in October. It's moving that fast. And so we're either going to be ahead of it or we're going to be behind it. And I think that is a sustainable strategic issue for the city. That's all I have to say.
Well, and I would agree with that a lot. Matter of fact, I was just reading a few weeks ago that the first artificial intelligence conference was held in 1955, and it seemed like nothing happened for about 70 years after that, and then all of a sudden it just exploded. So I think that's going to have a big impact on everything we do. I know I use it almost every day in my own personal life, so I think there's a lot of things we can look at. You've heard of the presentation from Commissioner Stevens and everything. Does city staff have any comments they want to make?
Yes, thank you for that opportunity. I appreciate the discussion, and I will say in my years of 14 years of having to present a budget as city manager in 2 different organizations, so 3 here, this is the first time working with the Budget Review Commission. So still conceptually migrating through how do we best utilize your time. I continue to be on the path that if you're able to see actuals when we present, almost like a draft budget, I would say, then you have something tangible to remark on and do the heavy lifting for, quite frankly, for City Council. So let me say that another way. You know, we present the budget to City Council, and at that time, the concrete is already starting to set, if it's not already set in many instances. So if you back up, say 60 to 90 days, and this board is able to look at it while we're still pouring the concrete, then we're really able to make more changes and put another set, many sets of eyes on it and say, did you look at this? Did you think about this? And it's almost like a precursor where we present the budget. We present the budget to you, and then you've really done that deep dive where you say, well, this doesn't, let's inquire a little bit more in this particular area. And so then you have a real life example, a tangible 26, 27 that you would be discussing for the budget year versus some philosophical thing. And I use the vacancies as a good example. I've spent a tremendous amount of time over the last 6 months digging into the vacancies that we have. I will tell you there's a little misinformation out there that I think that this group is probably aware of. Forgive me for a minute just to go in great detail here. And I believe a couple of years ago, we had a high watermark of a little over 300 positions. When you look at our 2,500 positions total and we're at 300, it was probably a little excessive. I will tell you, I don't know about your private experience, but from a public sector experience, we saw one of the tightest labor markets that we had seen around 21 through 23. And so it's not uncommon to have significant amount of vacancies. That's not to mean that those positions weren't needed. Now, as the labor market is certainly changing significantly over the past 12 to 18 months, seeing more applicants, quicker filling of those positions that have been on the books. So we went from a high watermark of over 300 a couple years ago to April of this year at approximately 188. So what is the magic number? If you look at it, it's never going to be zero, right? It's never going to be zero. So if you look at it, I might submit just for this discussion, maybe somewhere between 75 and 125. And it's a snapshot at any given time, and you're constantly, someone leaves. And I will submit also, very different than the private sector, particularly here in the public sector in the state of Arizona. It's called pensions. It's called a defined benefit program, and they just leave. They get their points and they depart, and they give us about 2 to 4 weeks notice, and they depart into the next chapter of their lives. Very different than in a defined benefit defined contribution program, where do I have enough? Do I have enough? Nope, I'll work another 6 months. I don't have enough. Here, they hit a magic point and they pull the ripcord and they're gone. So that creates these, we've got two going out and one coming in for the last couple of years. I'll get back to my numbers. Sorry, I digressed there for a little bit. In April of this year, we got down to about 188 or so. Then July 1st, we added 98 positions. The media calls us up and said, how many vacancies do you have? Well, we had just opened up 98 new positions. I would submit those were a little different than the 188 back in the spring. So back to where we are now, every single position comes through me. It's like, do we need this for operations? Every single position is critical to operations, or otherwise we're going to have deficiencies in services to residents as these requests come in. So that's just a good example where conceptually, I don't know that it's going to bear out any fruition, if you will. I'm already doing that as city manager or CEO for the organization. I think when we can really get into the details of the budget is when the police department presents their budget and they have 15 vacancies in the dispatch center and we have 40 authorized positions, and you say, why are you at 35% vacancy rate? That is what I would refer to as chronic vacancies, and we are working on a program to fill those vacancies. That's the tangible type of analysis that I think the 5 of you, please add the 7 of you, can really help us on, versus this conceptual. Let's talk about PSPRS. PSPRS, our defined pension program, and ASRS, that's just, quite frankly, good education. I encourage those new members to look into that, but we're not going to change PSPRS. We're not going to change ASRS. And so that kind of takes us, our focus in a different direction. So coming full circle, conception, I believe, looking at a practical 26-27 budget could really help narrow your focus as we move into that review process, specifically starting on the capital. The capital can be presented to you, which is really half of the overall. There's a lot of meat there. There's a lot of discussion that we can dig into if we're able to provide that in advance. Let me get into a few of the specifics so that's just conceptually what I might suggest, and then a few of the specifics here as outlined. I think our impact fee review, that would be great education, just kind of a great education and a good opportunity. I think there's probably a misinformation in the community, or maybe a lack of information about what development is paying for and maybe what existing residents are paying for. So I concur with that one. And then also talking about, what was the other item? Oh, cost recovery. Some of those areas, I see Westworld. Happy to continue to dig into the Westworld, some of those special facilities, how they also impact the broader economic activity within the community. So I think those are some tangible areas where we can spend some time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I especially like the fact of being able to give us some of the early budget information. I think that would be very beneficial for the committee. Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, I just want to add a couple of things to that. You know, we're always open to, I'd love the input on what city staff thinks we ought to do, and I have talked to some of you about this. One thing I do want to mention for the record or for everyone, there was an article in the paper the other day talking about how there were a lot of unfilled positions and that was fluff in your budget, blah, blah, blah. That was a misstatement in the newspaper, because just so you all know, they have a lot of unfilled positions. There's a budget line item that's a negative expense for expected unfilled positions throughout the year. So it's not like this city builds fluff into open positions for the purpose of reallocating those budget dollars to something else or some other little kitty. So that made me disappointed when I read that in the paper, because that was a mischaracterization of the way you manage yourself. And then also I appreciate your comments on the open positions of what you're doing. I had a thought I was debating whether to propose or not, and it sounds like you're kind of doing it as far as the way you're challenging positions when people leave, and so I may talk to you offline about that, but that was encouraging. And what else did I want to say? So otherwise, I think the thing for us to think about, I appreciated the city manager telling us a couple areas he saw value. I had in what we worked up the idea that we're maybe coming on the heels of the areas we're going to look at. I don't think what I have a clear picture on yet is exactly what that would look like as far as when do we go in, when do we do some work right on their heels, and how do we decide what we're going to look at. So that's still an open question for me.
Thank you. Does anybody else on the committee have any comments? Otherwise, Mark, you put some suggestions out there, and I think as a committee, we want to decide, you know, if we want to make a decision on looking at some of those. Again, I feel a little bit like my hands are tied because, you know, we're not a full committee yet, and we don't have a permanent chair for the committee yet. So the direction that we talk about today may or may not happen, but I think we could go ahead and make our recommendations for how we want to move forward. And Mark, I would like to move that, Commissioner Carla.
I just want to say that I agree with Commissioner, Vice Chair Schweikert. Let's just go, because if we keep waiting, the way things are changing every day, we'll never get anywhere. So let's just go.
So the chair would entertain a motion, if someone wants to make one, for just some of the ideas, maybe along your lines, Mark, of how we move forward on this. First of all, the city treasurer would like to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Schweiker. So we do have an agenda item, item 5 for I do have a quick presentation on that to help guide your discussion before you guys decide on sort of the areas that you want to work on. And this item that you're on, item 4, is really just to go over the presentation and the information that you and Commissioner Stevens had provided. So if we can go
Sure.
to item 5, and
Let's move into
cover
item
that.
5.
Thank you. So I'm waiting for the slides to come up. I just put a few slides together to help all of you in terms of making your decision in terms of a work plan for you. So next slide. So again, keeping in mind that we have a very compressed timeline, we always will because of the budget process and the fact that we have to provide the council with the proposed budget by May. And next slide. So some of the considerations are council authorization is required for subcommittees according to the city code. So if the commission decides to and agrees to form a subcommittee like 2-man teams, council has to approve that. So I want you to know that. And also there are other code restrictions with respect to what a 2-man team or subcommittee can or cannot do. I don't know if Jennifer of our city, if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Sure. I think the important thing to remember there is that a subcommittee would also be subject to the open meeting law. So those same requirements that you all have for doing your work in the public, that subcommittee would have that same standard. And in addition to that, there are limitations on your ability as well as any other subcommittee's ability to direct city staff. It's not authorized by the charter or code of ethics and other things. So that would be something also that has to be mindful of how you're doing the work when you have your subcommittees after you get council's approval and you're moving forward in that way.
And I think with what we did last year, we were all very cognizant of the fact that we are in no position to direct city staff on anything. You know, we can request information, but in no way have we tried to direct anything. So we're aware of that. Question on the city council having to approve subcommittees. Do they have to approve each individual subcommittee, or can they do a blanket approval to allow us to form subcommittees as needed?
I believe that once we put a work plan together on the areas that the commission would like to look into and the approach, and if the approach involves a subcommittee, then we can take it annually to council as this is the work plan of the 1 or 2 items that the commission would like to look at this year, and it involves the approach of using a subcommittee, and we can have them approve that as opposed to each time we have.
Okay, thank you. That makes it a lot easier. Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, I'm getting really hung up on this subcommittee thing, because does that mean last year when Commissioner Newman and Commissioner Carla met separately with individuals to understand what was going on with the Preserve project, that they were in violation of open meeting laws because their purpose was to meet together as two individuals of the commission to gather information to report back to us? And the same thing for that meeting we had with city staff that Commissioner or Vice Chair Schweiker and I had, where we met with city staff and gathered information. You know, is that a violation of open meeting law? Because if you're going to be that strict about how this open meeting law stuff, and I can't work with one of these people to go get information, then we're just going to have to do it individually. And each person's going to have to do it one-on-one with city staff to get some meat in order to get anything done. Because if open meeting laws apply to two people trying to carry out a task and carrying out a budget commission review, that's just hamstringing you in a way that's just unbelievable in my mind. So if it's any clarification, give it to me. Otherwise, we individually are going to have to start doing our work.
I can't speak to whatever happened previously because I don't have all those facts and I wasn't there. But what I can tell you is that the open meeting law is structured to be transparent, and that all of us as representatives of taxpayers or paid with taxpayer funds, our work is supposed to be transparent. And so, and that's something that Scottsdale as a leader has taken into account and put into its city code as well as its general plan. So, and I looked at those before the meeting, and they have statements in there that talk about, like, if there's any doubt, let's err on the side of caution and think that open meeting law applies. So I know that if you have a subcommittee, then if you have a quorum of them, right, it would constitute as a meeting. So let's say you have a subcommittee of 2 people, and they're going out and they're having deliberations, consultations, considerations for something that could result in a final action. And that final action is essentially, I think, an easy way to think about it, because the law uses the term if it's a legal action. But I think an easy way to think about it on the commission is if this is going to result in something that you're likely going to recommend to council, then likely it's going to be a legal action. And if you have a quorum, that work is supposed to be done in a public meeting.
You know, you shared with me a lot of the open meeting law stuff, and that legal action word I tried to pour into to understand what it means. I don't think anything I did with another person was moving towards a legal action. So maybe I have to figure out exactly what that part of the open meeting law means. But nothing my subcommittees did were legal actions. They were looking at information to report back to the board. After they reported, or back to the commission, after we reported back to the commission, then there was deliberation that may turn into a recommendation to council. But there was nothing that came out of recommendations to councils that I would envision any of the work that we're proposing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that everything we did was in terms of information gathering, and that no decisions were made other than in the council, other than the committee as a whole. So I think we kind of avoid the open meeting law on that aspect of it, because I don't think if, say, 2 members of this group are going to get together on some CIP projects just to get the information of the scope and how they're approached and everything, that's information gathering. I don't think that meeting would have to be posted as an open meeting, would it?
I think when you're just getting information, then I think that you're okay. But I think that it's a slippery slope, and it happens kind of fast, because if it's a 2-man work group and then we're getting information, and then let's say that it's the city manager and then I said, oh, Greg, what do you think about this? Now we're in a land where we're starting to have a deliberation, right, between the 2 of us. We're a quorum, we're a 2-man subcommittee. And so we could get sideways really quick with the open meeting law in that type of situation. So I think that when you look at guidance out there from, like, the Attorney General's office, the Ombudsman, or even, like I said, in our own city code, kind of wants you to make sure, like, for the most part, let's be doing our work in a public meeting, because it can happen really fast unintentionally.
Okay, so I assume that there are workarounds on things like this. Like a subcommittee could be, when we're staffed with 7 people, a subcommittee could be 5 people, though only 2 of those people go to any meeting to gather information. Therefore, it would not be a majority, so I don't think it would be covered under the open meeting law, would it?
There's still provisions in the open meeting law about doing things to circumvent the open meeting law by making like serial meetings or like using a straw man or having less than the people there. So I think if you're information gathering, you can do that. I just think it gets a little bit dicey and it can quickly turn when you're having considerations. Another thing you could consider doing is having in the meeting where you're receiving information and then coming back as a group and talking about that information publicly.
Which is what we do. Yeah, the 2 times we did it last year, those groups brought it back to the committee as a whole, and we discussed it in open meeting. So I mean, to me, I understand, I'm a lawyer too, so I understand that anytime you have 2 words put together, there's room for interpretation. But I think that I think that there's a way to do it where it's just, when we go out, we are just information gathering. We're not talking about what the solutions are. We're just getting information and bringing it back so that all 7 people don't have to go to those meetings. So I think that part is probably okay. Commissioner Carla?
Yes, I would like to stress that at no time did Commissioner Newman and myself refer to ourselves as a subcommittee or think we were acting as a subcommittee. We were having information-seeking discussions, and there was also someone from the Preserve Commission involved. I understand it's a slippery slope and you have to be cautious, but I do want to stress for the record that at no time did we portray ourselves as a subcommittee. We were simply exploring information with the knowledge that no action could be taken unless it was brought back to this group in an open meeting. So again, there's a way, but I agree with you, we need to be very, very clear. So thank you.
And getting the 2 of them to agree on anything is probably highly unlikely anyway. Commissioner Newman.
When you use the word quorum in this context, what is your definition?
For a subcommittee, it would depend on how many members. So it would be
Okay.
like the majority. So if it's a 2-member subcommittee, if they're both there, you have a quorum of that subcommittee.
Well, hold on. I thought quorum, as far as the open meeting law is defined, quorum is a quorum of the commission.
If you're making another...
If your committee by definition is less than a quorum of the commission, is it then something where the open meeting law is a problem if you're just gathering information, as we discussed? Because there's no way you can sway the vote. That's what's behind it, is transparency around the vote. So if you're not daisy chaining, and there's 2 people out of 7 that are having a discussion with staff to bring something productive back to the commission, how is that an open meeting law violation? I'm having trouble with your logic on that.
I think we probably need to take a step back. I'm not saying when you gather information and it's purely gathering information that that's a violation of open meeting law. What I'm saying is that when you're gathering information, you could quickly start to have conversations about that information amongst members or have deliberations, and then that's where it can become a slippery slope and a violation of open meeting law.
On that point, I agree with you, and that did not happen.
Sure. With regards to a quorum, if you're making another public body, if you have a subcommittee, then the quorum is determined based upon that public body. So here you have 7, so that's how you would determine. But that quorum of 7, that wouldn't apply when you make a separate public body. A subcommittee is still considered a public body, so it's whatever the quorum is for however many members you have.
So would we have the ability, let's forget and say we don't set up subcommittees. As a committee as a whole, do we have the ability for a couple of people to go meet with city staff on a particular area and get information to bring back to the rest of the committee?
Possibly. I think it depends on how you're effectuating it. And some of your things, it looks like, when I look through the materials for today, it looked like there would be subcommittees for specific topics, and that those two people would be doing sort of a deep dive into that topic that I think might more clearly resemble a subcommittee versus like all of us are looking at this. We're not having just these two people look at this topic, but two people are going to go get information.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, the way this was written on the back, there's a work plan here, and the work plan envisioned one or two individuals going and gaining an understanding of how the budget elements came together, and then putting together a presentation to the commission to tell them what they found, and then have a discussion about whether there should be any recommendations from the commission. In doing that, the reason I kept it at 2, my desire all along was that the 2 members would go do the work, and then as a courtesy to the chair, if they needed to, would give the chair a heads up as to what the recommendation might be, so we never go more than 3, and then we just have to make sure there's never another person. Otherwise, it's like, I gotta believe you can do something like this, because don't our council people as individuals talk to each other to share their ideas about what direction they think they should go, and they're just mindful they don't daisy chain it or to get to beyond 3 people discussing an item. So my design in this work plan was that we're going to lay out tasks that we're going to get to, and that 2 people in some cases might be gathering all the information, forming opinions about what should be discussed with the commission, and then discussing it with the commission that would then lead to a legal recommendation to council.
Commissioner Carla.
This is all good discussion, but why don't we just truncate it? Because the answer's right there in front of us, where Sonia talked about the fact that if we put together a work plan and we identify the specific areas that we want more in-depth study on, then council can approve the overall project, and then we can have these legal little subcommittees that follow every law and don't get us hit with, and staff hit with a million freedom of information requests, and we can actually move forward and get work done. I mean, wouldn't it work to just do it that way? Again, we get the first approval, and then we just apply it throughout the cycle. And then we're legal, theoretically, and we can, end this whole discussion.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, that sounds logical, but I heard that the minute we have 2 people look at something, it's a subcommittee, and a subcommittee is subject to open meeting laws. So that's the thing we got to figure out. Can we put a work plan together that allows 2 people to look into an area and then discuss it with the commission without making recommendations to council? So it has to be the 2 people, might come up with ideas, present them to the commission will discuss them. There may or may not be a suggestion of, hey, we ought to suggest this to council, what do you all think, yay or nay? And then at that point is when it would become something that would be going to council, and that would be open meeting laws. Or otherwise, are you telling me that if we pre-approve this plan where 2 people are going to look into an area, that meeting, we now have to have the public come into Sonia's office in order to be part of the discussion when we go over the information gathering?
I'm sorry, Commissioner, I didn't understand your question about Sonia's office.
Okay, when I gather information, when 2 of us gathered information, we went into her office and gathered information to understand something in order to provide feedback back to the commission about what we think should be looked at. I thought I heard you tell me that when the 2 of us start conferring and gathering information, it's a subcommittee and it requires open meeting law compliance, therefore the public has to be invited to it.
I think I understood what you said about going into Sonia's office to be that you went in there to get information, not to have deliberations, right? Was that
Well, that's what everything we're doing in our work plan is to gather information for the purpose of sharing the information with commission so they can make recommendations to council. But in doing that, I may Commissioner Newman and I may go through and look at something and say, hey, don't you think this would be a good idea? Hey, maybe we should recommend that to council. Let's present that to the commission so we can talk about it and decide if the commission should recommend it to council.
Mr. Chair, at the risk of inserting myself, because I'm not a JD here in this conversation, what I might suggest is that we prepare through the city attorney's office some guidance in this area. We appreciate the discussion, and I don't know that we're gonna, I think putting it on paper might help guide us to a solution. Again, I hear what you're trying to achieve, and we can put some thought down working with the city attorney's office and make some opinions in regard to a path forward.
Thank you. I think that'd be very beneficial because I don't think we're going to solve this just sitting up here talking about it now. So I would agree with that.
Okay, I wanted to also point out a few other things. Given that, again, the limitation of time, I wanted the commission to consider limiting the focus areas for this year and also maybe limiting the focus area meetings to 1 a month, with March and April being devoted to reviewing the proposed budget, and also consider limiting the meeting time and holding no additional meetings from February to June to allow the staff to focus on preparing the proposed budget, the final budget, and presentations for council. So that's just kind of something for you all to consider as you decide on the focus areas and the gathering of information or whatnot. To that is the time commitment that we have. And these regular meetings to look into different focus areas can resume between July and October for the commission to look at any detailed information that you decide to look into. I also wanted to, next slide. I also wanted to clarify what would be required in a work plan for City Council. The commission is tasked with reviewing the budget. In reviewing the budget, you may want to dive into detailed line item review and select departments for reviewing specifically the department's budget or cost categories presented in the proposed budget. Like, for example, if you want to look at contract services, any sort of detailed line item review of the proposed budget or in-depth analysis and understanding of revenue projections presented in the proposed budget, that is part of your primary objective and mission as a budget review commission. That does not require a work plan. That is just part of what the ordinance provides that the commission does. What would be included in a work plan for council approval is items that are not directly related to the proposed budget. For example, discussing any material policy changes like elimination of a revenue source or elimination of a program. And these are policy level discussions that council would provide direction to as to whether they would like the Budget Review Commission to dive into or not. So that would go into a work plan for council approval. Or any kind of in-depth review of operational processes and practices to better understand the budget. So that is, again, not specifically the charge of the commission, if you, so to speak, as part of the ordinance. The commission is not asked to dive into operational review. So if there is a desire to do operational reviews to better understand the proposed budget, we would ask that the commission put that in a work plan for council direction and consideration. And so the last slide, the next slide is, the other thing I would recommend that the commission do in developing a work plan is to consider the objective. So here are some examples in addition to approach. So if there's a focus area of a specific expenditure, to help staff understand the nature of the focus, and so to help staff understand what you are looking for so we can provide the right information for you is to kind of help us with the objective of the review. And so an example would be to obtain an understanding to help understand the drivers for that expenditure that's included in the budget so that we can gather the right information for you to look at. And so, the approach and then the timeline of what your interests are, if you would like to get that done in November. I think those are the details that as you work on the work plan, it would be helpful for staff to know in terms of the objective, the approach, and the timeline. And so, like, for example, a specific funding policy, and maybe the objective is maybe there is an interest in looking at a policy change for a specific budget objective, or maybe specific fees, understanding how the specific fees are determined and used, and so how we put that in the budget. So I think having the commission help staff understand what your objective is in doing the focus area reviews would help us gather the right information for you, and also the approach so that we can plan accordingly in terms of our own timelines and our own commitments to carve out the time to meet the approach that you guys would like us to help you with, and also the timeline. So those are considerations for when you put the work plan together. And then finally, the last slide I wanted to mention is and also this is for the sake of the audience to understand, is the Budget Review Commission is not formed to do the work of the city manager and the city treasurer in terms of our responsibilities in the budget. I know you guys know that, but just for the sake of the audience and whoever who's watching from home who may not know, that the Budget Review Commission is formed to review the budget and not necessarily to take over responsibilities that the city manager and city treasurer are charged to do. So for example, you might see a problem with vacancies, for example, that you have identified. As you have heard from the city manager, it is his responsibility to look into that and solve the problem with respect to vacancies and identify what the problems are. I think we're not anticipating that the Budget Review Commission needs to do that for the city manager. The Budget Review Commission is not asked to solve problems that you identify in the budget, but rather to direct staff to look into it and to, as part of your recommendation. So I hope that helps. So an example would be, we spent a lot of time last year looking at capital project processes, and there was a lot of good discussion and good suggestions and ideas from the commission on how to, maybe looking into how we scope projects, how we prioritize projects, and how we determine estimates. And those were, in terms of the Budget Review Commission's role and responsibility, sort of a learning objective in terms of understanding the budget and in terms of offering some suggestions for improvements. And then the city manager would take over from there, and his responsibility would be to actually find the problems and solve the problems, and that we're not expecting the Budget Review Commission to solve the problems for us. So I just wanted to make that clear for our audience and for also the Budget Commission. And with that, I can answer any questions and allow you all to talk about and discuss about what focus areas you would like to work on this year and put together as part of a work plan.
Commissioner Stevens.
Okay, I guess I'll tell you what, there is an 8-page document here, and if someone at staff would like to go through that and make it more specific as to how the work task could be laid out by us and timed with your people, I'm open to that. If there's another member of this commission that would like to go through this, that's another option, but I don't know, I don't know where to go next other than a lot of people have a lot of ideas, and go mark this thing up and tell me what you want us to do, and let's all decide if that's what we want to do. Otherwise, well, that's my 2 cents. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say, as far as you're going to give us guidance on that subcommittee 2 people thing, it would really be helpful if it said wherever the BRC members are going to have 2 individuals gather information in an area, they should be mindful that of the following things so that they don't violate. That way it would be a roadmap. I could say, oh, the 2 of us can go look into this, and we need to make sure we follow this protocol. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Commissioner Carla.
Yes, like everything else in life, this is going to come down to timing. So what Commissioner Stevens just requested about, asking for staff feedback about all these things that are on the list, it'll come down to what staff says, well, in our envisioned process, we're looking at A, B, C, and D. And then those, of course, would be the things that we should probably look at first, too, rather than going straight to L or M. I'll give a specific example. Last cycle, there was comments about some improvements to the Granite Reef Senior Center. And some commissioners wanted discussion about purpose, impact, et cetera. Now, if that's not in the upcoming budget cycle, or it's 2 out, then we don't need to look at it this cycle. But if it is in the upcoming cycle or 1 out, then we do need to look at it. So I guess what I'm asking is there a way for staff to look at, this list that Commissioner Stevens has put together and say, this is what would be in the front of your list? And that way we can better use our time, not waste your time, but actually look at the things there is an interest in. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, because we still theoretically have a work study with the council to get direction on the 21st of October, we need to get this work plan ready, correct? So we need to work backwards as to when we have to meet certain dates. And getting that direction would be fabulous because, getting a meeting calendar ready would be very helpful for all of us, I'm sure. So that's my input. Thank you.
Thank you, and I agree with that. Would the city want to look at Carla's suggestion and come back to us with what your suggestions would be?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay. And if so, timeline on that, and when do we need to get together again as a committee?
I think what we would do is, if there is a new chair appointment, we will wait for that and then try to see if we can include the new chair and other commissioner appointments. I'm still waiting for information on that, and once I find that out, I can let the commission know, and if there is 2 new members coming on board, we'll just wait for that. And we can always push back the work study
Yeah, I
with
was going to say
council.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, that work study on the
Yes.
21st is kind of the thing that's got me a little bit worried as to when we're going to be able to get together and talk about this and get it ready for that.
We can push that back to November or even later if needed.
Okay, Commissioner Carla?
With all due respect to Sonia, because I do respect her, I disagree. It's like, why are we waiting? If we're supposed to get this work done, we've got a quorum, let's go. Let's at least lay it out, because then whomever is appointed and they come in, unless they, vigorously disagree with the ideas, they may very well appreciate the fact that there's some structure. So again, I don't think we wait.
That's the desire of the commission. We could do that too. And, we could schedule a meeting later this month, push the work study session back to November, and we could regroup as a commission and go through a work plan.
Commissioner Stevens?
I would have a desire for some specificity in putting together a work plan, and I'm open to the city's input. And even last year I talked to you all about this. I really wanted to be sensitive to your schedules. And you've got a system conversion going on now that can't be more, that's incredibly stressful. My suggestion would be rather than wait for the chair, I'd rather have someone go through this document and get it in a format where it has a level of specificity that we would have our marching orders, but also have the input of city staff. I don't know if you have time for this, but I will make time for this in the next couple of weeks if I need to go through it. I would love it someone other than me would go through this to try to get some specificity in here. Or if two other people other than me just took this and did it, I'd love that too. But I'm open to any of those things, but I don't know if you have time for it, Sonia, but if you or Scott or whatever had, that we could get a level of specificity in here, and then the new chair and the new members can come in and say, this is good or it's not good.
We can try that. I would recommend that we simplify it, and if it would help the council if a work plan was in 1 or 2 slides versus a 8-page report. So, if we can somehow simplify it into a simple presentation for council, that might be easier for council to receive the work plan as well. So we can work with you on simplifying this report that we can then put on a slide for council to approve.
Okay, that triggers an idea. What if we put together a very detailed work plan for one element in each of the areas of operating, enterprise, and capital? One capital project, one enterprise entity, one operating entity. That way it has a level of specificity and timing that would merge with what you people are doing and we'd be on your heels. It'd only be one. Then when the new group comes in, they can decide if that makes sense. And if it is, then the question becomes, okay, what other capital projects, what other enterprise entity, what other operating group? But we just do one as an example.
I think I would also advise you to, again, look at the objective of the review. I mean, the objective needs to really be part of the core mission of the Budget Review Commission is to review the proposed budget. So if looking into one project helps you review the proposed budget for the CIP, then certainly, and if looking into one area of expenditure helps you review the proposed budget, then absolutely, we can do that.
I didn't mean one area of expenditure. I meant something like fire department, a cost center, and then cover all the elements that we'd have a picture of how we would attack it.
Commissioner Carla?
I don't disagree with what you're saying about go through one, but I think you have to back up, though, and get direction as to what is upcoming first. Because we don't want to pick something, no matter how much we're interested in it, that isn't, what did City Manager Caton say earlier, readiness, Let's deal with the things that there is readiness for or they're working to get readiness for, because that's what's going to be in the upcoming cycle, and deal with those first. And then do what you said, put together, the little work plan for it. But I think we need that direction first rather than waste their time and our time. Thank you.
City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of thoughts to add to the discussion. One that comes to mind, we rightfully so spend a tremendous amount of time on the expenditure side of our budget. I might suggest that one area of opportunity would be to look at the revenue side. And I think you could help us in a number of ways, particularly as I think we have an education opportunity to our broader community of our revenue streams and maybe some headwinds that we will be seeing over the next 20 months. Because again, as we start to prepare the 26-27 budget, one of the significant revenue streams is sales tax. And so we're literally trying to predict sales tax through June of 2027. So nearly 2 years out, and in times like this, the crystal ball becomes a little cloudy from time to time. So I wanted to insert that into the discussion. The other thing I might suggest is I get a sense that the commission feels a little rushed, and if you do, I feel that same way. But it's interesting, I think we have an opportunity. We shouldn't be rushed in October. By March and April, then we probably do feel rushed. So I do think we have some time over the next 30 to 60 days to develop a thoughtful approach to the 26-27 review and what role, what areas the commission sees are important. So I would stress, I don't feel the sense of urgency in October, and that might help you in guiding your path forward for really the heavy lifting that happens in January, in my mind.
And I appreciate your thoughts about the revenue, because I remember I was talking about that quite a bit last year of threats to revenue. I think that's very important for us to look at. So I would very much encourage adding that to our scope of work. City Treasurer?
Yeah, and I would like to add to City Manager Caton's comment about revenues. That is a great area for us to dive into. The other area that I think that we would be prepared to assist the deep dive or focused discussion is also the financial sustainability. We have done a lot of work in terms of putting together a financial conditions report to try to gauge financial sustainability and looking at key financial metrics, so we can offer that as a focus area for the commission as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Carla?
Yes, you know, in the area of revenue, I agree, and the first thing up I just have to say is it would be really helpful if the court let us know on 490 real soon. But the other part is, you know, when Sonia talked about things which are within the work plan or which would need council approval, she's talked about the loss of a revenue source. And in the previous cycle, that refers to the elimination of the food tax, which kept being brought up a lot, and which, again, I'm not in favor of because I don't think you get rid of a revenue source. But I do think we need to be ready if the legislature decides to go hog wild and take it away. So I just want us to be able to adjust should something like that happen. Because it's correct, if a revenue source goes away, like the food tax, we have a hole to fill. So, yeah, I think revenue is one of the good focuses, but also, you know, on capital. And again, I go back to what in your minds is at the state of readiness that we need to, you know, inform ourselves about. Thank you.
So we're kind of running out of time for this meeting. What I would suggest is that I would like to ask Commissioner Stevens, and if someone else would like to volunteer to help him, to put together a little work plan for next year and get it off to the city. Can he get off to the other commissioners, or do we have to send it out to the city and have you send it back to us?
We can work with a couple of the commissioners, Commissioner Stephen and whoever else, and develop a work plan, and we would then present it at another meeting with the whole commission.
Commissioner Carla?
I volunteered to help. I think most of the ideas will come from Mark, but I'm a good editor, so I will help.
Okay, so I would like to ask Commissioner Carla and Commissioner Stevens to work on that and submit it to the city and work with the city, and we'll have that for our next meeting. Is that agreeable with everybody on the committee?
Yes.
Okay. So let's see. Do we have anything else on the agenda for today? Just our identification of, the method and approval of presentation to council.
Yeah, that will just have to carry to a different meeting.
That'll just have to carry. And I think the same with the identification and approval of possible future agenda items. So with that, I move we adjourn.
I had a request to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Commissioner Stevens.
Just help me on specificity, because what's going to happen is City Treasurer Sonia's going to want something that's a little bit higher level to present to the council, and I get it. I'm going to want something more detailed that would be a work plan so we can actually go do something once we do it. And so I'm a little bit unclear about what our next step is for Commissioner Carla and I, because otherwise I'm tempted to say, here's my work plan, mark it up, tell me what you think we should do, what I'm missing, how I time this with your staff, and then we'll take a look at that.
Well, my feeling is the committee wants something with a little more specificity, maybe not to the degree that you would really like, but somewhere in between the high level and in the trenches. So I trust that you and Carla and the city can come up with something that's agreeable, but again, it's not necessarily what the city wants, it's what the committee wants. So if you want a little more specificity in there than the...
Okay. That it may end up looking more like the tail end of the PowerPoint presentation that I went through. It kind of had each of the key areas as far as operating, enterprise, capital, and sustainability, and it had bullet points as to how we were going to attach it. It might end up looking more like that.
Correct.
And then I guess the thing we should work on, I really would like us to spend a little bit of time to work on how we would time our work with your people so it's not as invasive, yet we get something substantive that we can report back. So that we'll be marching towards more of a 4 or 5 page PowerPoint presentation as opposed to a 10-page detailed
Yes.
work plan.
Yes,
Okay?
yes.
Speak now or forever hold your peace. Yeah?
Okay, I think we're in agreement
That
on
wasn't
that.
resounding. Okay.
Meeting adjourned. Do we have to vote on adjourning the meeting? No.